I'm here somewhere. There I is. Hey, Rio here. It is week 9 in CIT93 JavaScript. And this was a big week we finished, which was really the getting the input from the user. And the one thing I'd like to say, and you'll see this in my topics I want to cover, is that it's really best practices to use a form and then listen for the submit on the form is a better practice than listening for, like he shows when he does the filter and he has the inputs where he filters whatever is to dos, I think. Like those things are great for exactly that functionality. But for what you're going to do from here and now to the next dev, it is really better practice to use the form and then naming the inputs, the checks boxes, or whatever it is you have as far as getting what things you're using in the HTML to gather the user input, right? Then referencing those from like e.target.elements because it'll show you all the elements inside the form. So it's just a better way, and you really only should have one form. Unless you have a need, and we'll talk about a little more this week, right? How to add additional functionality to your rendered list. It's not necessarily another form, although it could be. But in general, okay, that's one thing. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that's one thing very commonly I saw in the stuff in the output for this week. And remember, the key is you want to gather get the user input, right, on submit, get those values, and then you need to be running your decision code, saving that decision, and you can figure out which part of the decision you want to save into a global array of objects and then rendering that back into the screen. This is basically the beginnings of what we call a CRUD operation, a create and read. And then we're going to work on update and delete this week. So I know these are pretty heady topics. The more you get down in there and code it, the better it will become. But before I get there, I should have started with this, but maybe bearing the lead a little bit, if you've ever heard that term. We are on week 9. And week 9 is that point in the semester where I always like to joke, and I should play the song that I think of in my head, which is Should I Stay or Should I Go Now? And this class, the last opportunity you have to drop this class with a W on your transcript is this Friday coming up. So I'm not recommending it for anyone. I'm just wanting you to know what your options are for this class. And so that will be this Friday. And if I've talked to many of you. If you want to talk about, where you're at and next steps, please, either way, come see me. So speaking of which, next semester, right now, the plan is I'll be teaching Node.js, which is JavaScript on the server side. So I'd love to have as many of you that are interested in joining that class. That'll be an 18-week online class next semester. Right now, there's going to be somebody else teaching JavaScript, as far as I know. But I just wanted more than anything to say, week 9 is upon us. It means we're halfway through this class. And we have a Dev 2 coming, or Dev 1 coming up fairly soon. But let me talk about a few topics related to this week. First, I already talked about this one. Now, this week we're going to learn, we're going to use our first, not code we've written, somebody else's code. And is really important in the instruction. I actually have a video just explaining some of the context for this week. Understanding, right, because what you'll end up doing is he will give you a link in the course for grabbing that code. And I don't recommend that. I recommend loading that locally. I'll show you in a minute what I mean by that. Okay. So we're using somebody else's code, and I use an older version of it. And I'll show you where I put it. And I actually would do both public and private, is to put it in its own directory. That way we can use it for whatever code we're doing. But it also does create a little bit of a challenge with dev tools, but only to the point of understanding how not to show that code. And this is a fairly common thing as well. So let me just show you what I did. Here we are. So in my index file, this is that's week 10. week 9. Just playing around with this earlier. So in my week 9 index, and you can do this in your private as well. Okay, this is just in the public because that's the one I had open. I created a folder right off the root called UUID, and then in that folder, I placed the UUID V4 version 4. Now this is, it's actually generally what we call minified, which says all the spaces have been taken out, but in this case, I guess I didn't get a minified version. But that's really because you'll never really look at, you could, it'd be fun to read through this code, but really you don't have to. What you're going to do is use this code, okay? And again, I don't recommend using the reference that he gives in the course because it actually has broken a couple of students' code because too many people hit that site. It's a what we call a CDN or just a cloud reference site. So then, like I said, in my code, then I just said dot dot basically says move back one directory, okay, in the structure, and then look at that folder and then reference this. Okay, so first just know that's the way I recommend doing it for both the code along work and for the public work or the learn together work that you'll start for next week. Now we'll learn what UUID is used for. It's basically targeting unique items or on how do we listen for unique items on the DOM. And in this case, it'll be like checkboxes and other things that you'll see. So now, having said that, let me come over here and just show you. We're going to talk about local storage as well, because that's the other thing we will learn this week is how to make persistent data. Okay, but I'm going to go to my sources. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to pull up my app.js, and you also reorganize, add a new file just for your functions. And this is so helpful to actually have only in your app.js your event listeners and maybe setting up just your divs for your query selector. That's nice. We'll end up using, like I said, your local storage a little bit. But here's what I want to show you because it's actually here. Oh, actually, it's not. It's actually not. So we don't do the UUID on the form itself. It's when we render, okay? It's when we render, which is over in functions, that's when I push that UUID. Yeah, it's right here, okay? So it's right here when I process the suggestion, and that's why I had it broken here. But let me go, because it'll trigger either way. So I'm gonna go over here, put in some data. Now, this week, you also want to add some functionality to your form. Most of you just had one item. You need at least another one because the other thing you need to do this week is validation, okay? So once I hit this, this will then trigger in my functions, right? After it runs this, then, well, actually it's here. So if I just step, and by the way, this is the other thing is if I don't want to watch that code run, if I just step over it, then it runs that code. It runs this code. Now in this line right here, if I was stepping into it, it would open that UUID. Okay, but I actually don't need to see that code, like I said before, so I'm just going to step over it. But if I wanted to, I could scroll back and see the ID that was set or the ID that was created by this code. So I just want you to know that when you're using DevTools is that when you get to the line right here, right on line 76, instead of stepping into it, just do yourself a favor and step over this function because you don't need to see it. And I hope that helps at least because I know many of you, and I really hope you find this beneficial, are using DevTools to walk through your code, okay? Okay, so I've talked about forms are really best practice, not just listening for inputs, right? Persistence. So this week, what we learn, and I'm just going to go ahead and let this process. And that's the other thing is if I go ahead and hit the, because we're paused right now, if I just hit this, it completes its work. And what happens is last week, you may have noticed if you hit refresh on the page, your output should go away. But this week it doesn't. Okay, this week when you hit that, it stays because it's now persistent. And how is it persisting? It is persisting via what you will learn this week with local storage. Okay, so local storage, like right now, if I came over to application and I looked at my local storage here, what I can see is that that output of that decision is now saved in the local storage of this computer. I will say this to you, local storage is not the best option for this, but it's a way we get to experience persistent data, right? So before this, everything we entered was just volatile in the computer's memory, and when we hit refresh, it went away. So now we're going to be using a feature of every computer is to have this local storage that we can then store into. But the other thing local storage will give us is the ability to store that ID, right? So here is now part of what we're adding functionality to. And actually, I noticed today I need to finish coding this. I was looking at this maybe before as a data collection, and I was asking because, like, for machine learning, if this output was doable, so then I could go back and maybe run some AI models against it. But I think what I'm going to do is actually just delete this, right? Is to say, re-enter this data or something, and then we'll remove that, which is part of what you're learning this week. So there's a lot of new terms that are hitting you this week, okay? And I'm going to add one to it, which is form validation. I've given you in the Learn Together, and you can see it here. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to go ahead and clear the local storage, so this no longer shows up. And if I hit refresh, then that goes away. But now, in addition, and so the required that some of you, most of you did last week is a great way to start, but it's the very minimal of form validation. Form validation is such an important topic, okay? So if I do this, if I hit submit, what I'm doing is I've written some custom form validation that is up in my app.js that you will learn based on a video I'm going to give you. So in addition to adding some functionality to your form, so in other words, you need more than one input here, right? You're also going to write some form validation, and you can write it. And if I look at it here, and you'll learn this about setting up an array, and then if certain conditions exist, I'll push some message into it, and then at the end, I'll just what we call join that together, and then update the DOM here. Now, again, there's a video to walk you through that. But more than anything, I just want you to start knowing that from now on, you should never create a form or give it to a user without writing some validation, because the users by nature will not give you the data you want. I mean, I know you as a user, you've experienced this where you enter information into a form, and if you forget something or you don't do something right, the system will prompt you to say, hey, you missed something here. So you can imagine how important that is for our overall experience on the web. So learning how to code that is way great. And again, from now on, and let's just say it, we agree that we don't write form submissions, like when we hit the submit and we listen for the submit, we don't write them without having something more than just required. Required using the attribute on an input or something else is bare minimum and really isn't great validation. But for last week, it was fine. But going forward, you need to have something more that you're doing. So I know this is a lot, and we're at week 9. So we've come a long way. We have a long way to go. So the thing is, I would want to know, what would I want to know from you this week, right? Like, we're doing a lot of different stuff. Like, is there any questions on some of the stuff that I've covered, right? Do you know when my office hours are? They're in the syllabus. I'm seeing more of you in my office hours, which is great. I love that, to have conversations about that, right? What more? What? No, I don't even want to ask that. What I'm going to say here is, let's all agree. Do you understand what form validation is? You don't have to know at this point how to write it, okay? But I want you to understand, like, as in your reply, like, you've experienced it. Now, do you have a better understanding of what form validation is? That's really the question, besides anything else that you want to ask me. All right, I think that's it. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.